Welcome back to Casuals Corner MMA Q&A show. Firstly, thank you very much for sending into your questions on the YouTube community channel. I appreciate it as always. And before we jump into the video, you know what to do. Hit the like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, bringing you MMA from the UK. So let's get into the questions. Number one, shout out P Norm for this one. Does Tai have the tools to get past Ciryl Gane? This is a very intriguing question, and this is one that I've been thinking a lot about recently, because when Tai Tuivasa started stringing together a few wins, looking impressive and taking shots from Derek Lewis, that doesn't get spoke about enough. Derek Lewis. That's an incredible accomplishment in itself. But when we have a look at Tai Tuivasa, my first thoughts were, has he jumped up to that number 3 spot too quickly? Is he a little bit out of his depth? Does he need one or two more fights to sort of establish himself at the top of the division? But the more I think about it, the more I think not necessarily, because there's no one in that division that he can't knock out, including Francis Ngannou, and he can eat a shot. He can eat big shots. Now, I'm not saying he's going to stand there and trade with the likes of Francis Ngannou, but when we have a look at someone like Ciryl Gane, we know what he typically wants to do. He wants to play that game on the outside. He blitzes in very well, lets go of his combinations, then keeps himself very safe in the pocket, disengages, and plays that for 5 minutes. And if he finds his opening, he'll probably put you away. And if he doesn't, he'll happily take the points. But the thing with Tai Tuivasa, which stands him out, is you're not going to grapple with him. Someone like Ciryl Gane is not going to want to grapple with him. And Tai Tuivasa is a big boy. So he does well to get to his feet because he's so strong. You've seen the anti-jiu-jitsu and anti-grappling of people like Derek Lewis, and he's no different. So he gets to his feet very well. But what Tai Tuivasa does, like not a lot of people do in the heavyweight division, is bites down on the mouthpiece, stands in the pocket, and trades fire with fire. Now, you can say what you like about Greg Hardy as a human being, but as a fighter, he is a seriously powerful athlete, if nothing else. And he stood in the pocket, got stung, and threw down. And you see against Derek Lewis what Tai Tuivasa does to get to his feet. He just throws bombs, and that is a dangerous and reckless human being. And Ciryl Gane looks very good when we're playing a pretty kickboxing game, but when someone wants to have a scrap, that's where we haven't seen Ciryl Gane. So as high on Ciryl Gane as I am, as much of a fan as I am, this one's going to be intriguing, because I want to see someone bring that dogfight out in Ciryl Gane. Even the fight with Francis, it was still a mixed martial arts fight. We still stood in the confines within the sport. There was nothing vicious. But Tai Tuivasa gets you in a street fight. He gets you in a brawl, and his boxing is getting ever better, and his conditioning is getting better, and he's taking the game more seriously. His strength and conditioning is coming on leaps and bounds. And now when you look at him, he's cutting down to 260 pounds, and he's an athlete. He is an athlete. He may not look necessarily stereotypical heavyweight, but he is athletic. When I spent some time down in the Pacific Islands, you see some of the athletes that these countries birth. They are no joke. The crazy mixture they have of endurance and strength and speed at times, it's outrageous. And you look at someone like Tai Tuivasa, he has hand speed, so he can let a 3-punch combination go on anybody. And if he does that against Ciryl Gane, he could make short work of it. So there's a lot to be said for this fight. Where is Tai Tuivasa at is really what we're asking. And also, can he lure Ciryl Gane into that? How smart is Ciryl Gane? Is he going to know that? Is he going to stay within himself and not get lured in? But you never know about fighting an ego, especially like someone, Ciryl Gane, who maybe hasn't had as much experience. That's the only thing you can say for him, because his skill set matches up with anyone. We've seen that. I know it was close with Ngannou. So that one's got me excited. And that is on a fantastic fight night card with Marvin Vettori and Bobby Knuckles as the co-main. So shout out P Norm for that one. I appreciate you, because you're always engaging on the content, always writing on the community, so that doesn't go unnoticed. Question 2, should there be more weight classes in the UFC? And shout out to P Boy for this one on the YouTube community tab. The short answer, I think yes. I do believe that the UFC, firstly, are not going to do this anytime soon, if ever. The second reason I believe that's for is because they don't want to dilute what it means to be a champion. They don't want it like boxing where you've got 1,000 belts to defend. And I do get that, and I do respect that. But I think the difference between boxing and the UFC adding a 265-pound division is very different. Very, very different. I don't think that's diluting it too much. But depends what you want to see as a fan. Realistically, you would get to see more title fights, I guess, so you would get more bang for your buck, especially in a day and age where people are paying more for their pay-per-view cards. You'll get the chance to see more champions, more championship fights. So that's exciting, because there are some divisions which are so ridiculously stacked and they're amazing. You look at someone like bantamweight, but sometimes you even think you would even like these to be more active, and if they were two separate weight classes, maybe we could even see more activity and more of a churn rate sometimes, because sometimes you see jog lambs, lamb jogs, jog lambs. What's the word? Log jams. But yeah, I think they should. Kevin Lee would be the intermediate weight between lightweight and welterweight. He'd be the champion of that. But there'd be an interesting dynamic to the whole UFC. So I definitely think they should do it, because you do just find athletes that sit naturally within that border. You just find people that do. Some people that aren't quite big enough to go to lightweight, and some people that are a bit too big and can't cut that much weight to go to featherweight. I think of someone like Grant Dawson. I know that's a very random example, but he's a very good talent. But I look at him and I think he's maybe not quite big enough to do it and threaten people at the top at lightweight with his skill set, even though it's very good. But it's going to be hard for him to make the weight down. So I think there definitely should be, 100%. Next question. Can someone represent the sport without competing? Shout out Zach Khan for this one. So this is one that I hear quite a lot. And what I will say to this is, the closer that you get to doing something, the better you're going to understand it. So if you have been in a UFC title fight, then you are going to understand it. This is obviously clear, but you're going to understand it at a level and a depth which no one else is going to, unless you've experienced that. So that's why I always take so much stock in what these champions are saying. So when people are talking about commentators and they're terrible and they give awful calls, at the end of the day, they have been in that position. They have been in a position that none of us have. So I always find it fascinating to hear their insight, hear what they experienced, what they believe they may be experiencing, because that's insight that we don't have. But going back to your question, can you reflect on a sport if you haven't played it? As I was saying, the more you've done of that thing, of course you're going to be closer to it. So if you're competing, if you're training, you're naturally going to be able to put yourself in these positions a little bit better, even if it's not competing on these mass stages. But what I will say is also a mindset thing. It's how much do you want to understand the sport? Because if I look at someone like myself, and I'm someone that wants to understand the sport on every level and every facet. So I'm listening to interviews of fighters. I'm listening to when they say they don't have a bad performances. I'm listening to interviewers, how the interviews are, every sort of reflection piece, behind the scenes pieces, training footage, every layer of it, so I can give myself as much of a clear picture as I possibly can. So I've never personally been in these scenarios. By listening to so many of these athletes talk about being in that scenario, I can cross-reference the situation and then be able to give a slightly more accurate take. So I do think it depends where your mindset's at with the sport, because you do get some people that train. They train a lot and they train consistently, but that also, for some people, is enough for them not to be a student of the game and learn more. Look behind the scenes, look under the roof of the bonnet, if you will, and really dig into the sport. And they think, I train it so I know about it. And I do see those sort of approaches online. But of course, if you're training very frequently and you're consistently in those environments, you're going to have a very good feel of what that feels like to be in those moments, even if it's just that competition between yourself and another human being in a cage, half naked with 4-ounce gloves. It's a very particular experience that is not close to a lot of things. So I always empathize massively for any level of athlete that always steps into the cage. Even when I go to amateur circuits, I feel just the same as I do when I go to professional setup. So it's a very intriguing and crazy sport, to be perfectly honest. But that brings us on to our next question. Thoughts on Nate Diaz versus Kevin Holland? Shout out Kohi for this one. This is a fight that I want 100%. I went on my YouTube community tab and I said, this is what we need. What do we think about this? And the reception was good. The reception was a very good one because this fight makes more sense than any other fight on the roster. That's a bold statement, but I genuinely stand by that. We have Kevin Holland, who is known for being this outlandish character, for having these amazing storylines. The fella is an actual superhero. 4 times. He has stopped 4 crimes. He is literally Batman, or in the words of Kevin Holland, Black Man. He is a great character on the mic. He's got unbelievable talents. He's gone down to welterweight. He's got a new strength and conditioning plan. He's done these shrooms, believes he's going to become champion, and now he's an actual athlete. He was fighting at 185 pounds before and walking into fight night at 185 pounds, stuffing his face to get to that weight, whilst people were cutting down from 200. And he's going in there with the likes of Marvin Vettori on late notice. Do not forget the nuance within Kevin Holland and not getting finished, taking it to a decision. So when you actually look at his performances and you actually have a look at his career thus far, Kevin Holland is a diamond in the rough because he's got Kevin Luter black belt jiu-jitsu from 10th Planet. So he's tricky off his back. We've seen that. We've seen him knock out JDS off his back. You don't do that. You do not do that. No one does that. So we've seen his dexterity, we've seen his creativeness, and now we're seeing him add takedown defense on top of that. And also being 6'2" or 6'3" at the welterweight division. He's so tall, he's so long. It's a lot easier for him to defend them takedowns on people of a welterweight division. It's a lot harder to get under his hips because his limbs are so long. So I think he's a serious problem. We know what his striking's like. We know what his kung fu's like. He's an exciting fighter. And then you bolt onto that, he's a huge name. That's the perfect fight for Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz needs someone who would be happy to play a little bit of jiu-jitsu, who's a little bit wild on the feet, that's going to give him openings, that's going to maybe play to the crowd a little bit. He doesn't want someone like a Khamzat Chimaev who's going to go out there, double leg him, and just try and maul him. He doesn't want that. He wants someone to play the game a little bit. Now, I think Kevin Holland can do that. Now, whilst I think Kevin Holland will definitely take the win, I think this is the best fight Nate Diaz is going to get. This is the best of a bad bunch because when you're getting paid that amount of money and you have 1 fight left on your contract, they are not giving you any scrub with no name value. They need to make it marketable. They want to juice every last dollar out of Nate Diaz. Best believe that. So I think when all things considered, that's the fight to make. And I would argue, I could be wrong in terms of pay-per-view numbers. I think Masvidal obviously would do higher pay-per-view numbers. But I think in terms of the actual MMA community and what they'd actually want to see, I think most people want to see that Kevin Holland fight before they would want to see a rematch with Jorge Masvidal. Just because we saw how the first one went. And I think we can both agree, well, I can personally agree that I'm not that bothered in seeing that again. But I wouldn't be against it. Next question. Thoughts on TJ? Does he have the defense to keep Aljamain Sterling off his back? Shout out Rocket Durham for this question. This is an exciting matchup. TJ Dillashaw has scratched and clawed his way back to the top. And a lot of people, of course, make the conversation of Dillashaw and everything that he's done and the drug scandals that he's been through. And that's 100% warrant. But there is something to be said of he serves his time. Now can we stop having the conversation of that fighter and see it almost as like a TJ.2? And so we can just view him a little bit objectively as a fighter in the bantamweight division. Because when we forget about everything that's happened, I know it's difficult to do, but we actually think about what fighter he is. The fight that he just had with Corey Sandhagen, he's a very interesting prospect at bantamweight. He always has been. And that's what makes him so exciting, because of that experience and because of that skill set. So I think he matches up very well against someone like Aljamain Sterling. We know TJ's been at the top. We have a look at his recent performance. I personally felt Corey Sandhagen won. He didn't. He didn't get the nod, so he didn't win. I personally felt he won. But the fact that TJ Dillashaw had his knee ripped off in the first round and had his eye busted open so he couldn't see with one eye on his first fight back after that 2-year layoff, with everything that's happened, all the pressure, all the outside noise, all the haters, the trolls, the constant reminders of the bad mistakes that you've made, to come out and do that against a Corey Sandhagen who was turning people into stone, that cannot be overlooked. That cannot be overlooked, that kind of adversity. And if nothing else, TJ Dillashaw's always been known to be one thing. That is competitive. TJ Dillashaw is a competitor. So I think he matches up very well for him. He's wrestling, he's takedown defense, he's offensive game as well as his defensive game. He's striking. He does what Aljo does in terms of on the feet, but I think he does it a little bit better. I think we can agree he's a little bit of a better striker, or even a lot better of a striker than Aljo. But Aljo blends it together very, very well, and his conditioning is off the charts. So this could be a war of attrition. This could be a war of attrition with grappling and striking mixed in, and we could see a little bit of everything. But I think it's going to be hard for Aljamain Sterling to keep his belt against someone as experienced as TJ Dillashaw, because that man is on a mission and he has something to prove. Because when he had all that drug scandal, of course people are going to discredit everything he's done now, and rightly so to a certain regard. But he needs to come out now again and say, hold up, I done that once, like he said he done. Like the results actually do show, to be fair. I've done that once. That was not based off my whole career. You cannot base that off my whole career. This is the real me. This is my level. So he's got a lot to prove on that. Next question. Can you become a high-level fighter without a media presence? Yes and no is the answer to this. The answer is yes, because if you are the select level, the 0.01% whose talent shines so much brighter than everyone else, it just cuts through the noise. You don't have to utter a word on social media. You don't even have social media accounts, but your face, your name, your knockouts is plastered all around the MMA world. Then yes, you will be able to make yourself a name. You'll be able to make yourself a career off of that. We're talking people that are really at the top of the game that can do that on a consistent basis. But for the most part, that isn't often people. And even at a lower level, amateur and even professional to a lower degree, you still have to make somewhat of a splash, whatever that is, because attention is currency in this day and age. And ultimately, whoever is the most valuable to the UFC gets paid the most. So a lot of people will be having the conversation of fighter pay. And I don't think it's a bad conversation. There's definitely things that I think should improve. But also, we look at these fighters and they don't even make any sort of contribution to the media world in their post-fight press conferences. They're not online. They have no YouTubes or TikToks and Instagrams. And people could argue they're fighters. They shouldn't have to do that. And you should be right. But that isn't the world we live in. And sometimes people don't really want to accept that. So you look at some fighters that are really doing it well. You have a look at the lower scale. Arnold Allen does very well on his Instagram and his YouTube. You have a look at people like Paddy the Baddy, naturally is doing it very well. And you have to leverage your name, and you have to make sure people know who you are. You don't have to do it inauthentically, but people have to know, because attention is money. So if you want to get to the top, it's always going to be easy with a social media presence. But if your skill is that 0.01%, then by all means you can get to the top with just that. The next question is, should fighters with a good ground game pull guard in MMA specifically? Shout out to Money Shot for this question on the YouTube community tab. My short answer is going to be no. Now, of course, there is exceptions to this. You could say for certain people that it's a good idea. The general consensus is no. In mixed martial arts, you have 4-ounce gloves on. You are basically punching people bare knuckle, but it's actually probably more of an advantage because you don't break your knuckles, so you can actually do it more repetitively. It's a dangerous place to be, is what I mean, when you're lying on your back with the ability of someone standing over you, raining down shots. That isn't somewhere you want to be an awful lot. That's why when you see things like heel hooks and leg attacks in MMA, it's that bit more impressive when they manage to get it, because it puts you in such a vulnerable position. Now, saying that, of course we have people like Charles Oliveira. The champion has a name. Charlie Olives for sure can do this, but he has a level of jiu-jitsu that people do not have, quite simply put. He has a level of finishes that is the highest in the UFC, so he can afford to do this. And he's also created this legacy of being this submission wizard, which supersedes his own image. So as soon as he goes to the ground, people are not thinking, he's actually a little bit hurt and I could probably get on top and land a couple of shots here. They're already thinking, I don't want to get in that guard. So that representation of Charles Oliveira is sometimes more terrifying than even doing the actual act, because that's not the game that they want to engage in. So for the most part, you don't want to be there. It puts you in a very vulnerable position, and especially with those small gloves, people can knock you out at any given phase. It doesn't take a lot if someone catches you clean whilst you're not looking. And when you're in close proximity and you've got things that are framed, and sometimes people have got things locked in, maybe like trapped a wrist or trapped an arm or a knee, so you can't really escape positions very well, and you're locked in, the accuracy is a lot more. Going back to what we spoke about 5 minutes ago, Kevin Holland is an amazing example of what he done to Jack Ray Silva. So I would say no, unless you're Charles Oliveira or Paul Craig, because that man has one of the nastiest guards in the UFC. I don't understand why people keep following him down to the mat. I don't understand that. If you are watching tape on Paul Craig, the only thing I can think of, these people cannot have watched a single Paul Craig highlight, because that man's fights end the same. You get tired or you hurt him and you follow him to the mat and he triangles you every single time. So I have no idea what Nikita Krylov was doing in UFC London, but I loved every second of it. So the penultimate question, top 5 favourite strikers. Shout out to RA for this one. Now, I don't know if I'm going to do 5, but I'm going to rattle a couple off the top of my head. Number 1 is Volk, hands down. His offense, his defense, his boxing, it's so crisp, it's so sharp. The way that he lets combinations go, the angles that he hits. Volk has my favourite striking to watch in the UFC, but I'm going to add Sean O'Malley in there. I know people aren't going to like that and they get very upset whenever anyone discusses Sean O'Malley, but when you actually watch his striking, it's a beautiful thing to watch. His footwork, his feints, the way that he switches stances, it's incredible. He has every attack off of every stance. It's beautiful to watch. Bobby Green, slightly underrated. Bobby Green, I believe, is one of the best boxers in the UFC, certainly, and every given opportunity I can watch Bobby Green have a 5-rounder or a 3-rounder, I'm absolutely down. He turns up every single time and he's for sure one of the best strikers. And I don't know if Adrian Yanez can put himself into this bracket yet. I don't necessarily think he's done enough against a high-level opportunity yet to put him here, but just to watch, Adrian Yanez 100% is in my top 5 to watch in regards to striking. His boxing is so clean, it's so crisp. He hits angles of attacks that you don't often see, and his accuracy is not like many people's that we see. We think of Conor, of course Conor has to be in this conversation, but we look at Adrian Yanez and the things that he's doing, not a lot of people are doing. He's now, 4-5-0 in the UFC? All performance of the night bonuses? That's unheard of. So Adrian Yanez 100% is in that equation. There's definitely some off the top of my head that I am forgetting. I know that. And people are going to hit me up and say, you forgot this and this and this. I know that. Don't get on to me. But doing it off the fly, doing it off the top of the dome is not the easiest thing. Which lands us with our last question. Will Bo Nickal be in the UFC in 2023? Shout out Truth Hurts for that one on the YouTube community. Yes. That's my short answer. That's how I'm going to start this. Yes, 100%. I believe his name has been added to the roster, which means one thing. It could mean two things. Of course, he's actually in the organisation, but I don't think it's as simple as that yet. I believe he's going to go through Dana White's Contender Series, and I believe he's going to knock his opponent out, because Bo Nickal is the truth. Bo Nickal is the truth. Now, I was hesitant to say that, but there is a level of wrestling which most people can't comprehend or compete with. There's a level of wrestling which means that you have been in the wrestling room your entire life, lived and breathed it. You have been in that process, that grind, ever since you can remember. A different level of wrestling. We've seen it at the highest level when I reference back to someone like Khabib, even GSP. The next question is going to be his striking, because that's the obvious one. If you can keep him striking, if you can defend the takedowns, then you can beat him. But you have a look at Bo Nickal. He's not the type of guy to shoot on a double leg and look to grind out a decision. He wants to go in there and weaponize his takedowns as an opportunity to use them as feints to set up his hands, because your hands have to be naturally lower when you're facing Bo Nickal. And if you're coming into a professional fight where you haven't had a ton of experience, or maybe you're on Dana White's or early on in the UFC, you're likely not going to have, or 99% of the time, not going to have a level of wrestling like Bo Nickal does. So your guard is going to have to a little bit lower, get them hands a little bit lower, threatening for that takedown. And as soon as you do that, he comes with absolute bombs. He is not afraid to throw hands, and I think this is what makes him so exciting, because he wants to come out and knock people out. I've heard Jorge Masvidal talk about him, and he says the exact same thing. He says he comes out to hurt people and knock them out, which is rare in wrestlers, because when you have an advantage like that over people in mixed martial arts, that's the option that you take. If you have an advantage which is so clear, like Bo Nickal's wrestling with all of these mixed martial artists he's going to stumble across, that's the path of least resistance. But he says, I don't want any part of that. I want to sit here, I want to throw down, and I want to knock you out. And that is a terrifying individual, because he has heavy hands. And like I said, you're constantly second guessing, because now he has that threat. Now you get comfortable on the hands. Now you get comfortable thinking, okay, he's going to throw hands, I've got to defend this, and you're bringing the hands up here, bang, goes to a leg, double leg, and now he's just on top of you, raining heavy shots from the top. So I believe he's a problem. I really want to see at what level his striking's at, but the way that he's such a grinder, and he's in the gym room so often, and he's always learning, and he's young, and he's just a competitor, I think he's a problem. I think he walks through his Dana White's Contender Series, and I think we really start getting eyeballs around Bo Nickal, because he's a character, and I think he's a problem. So that wraps us up for the MMA Q&A show. Thank you very much for your questions. As always, keep your eyes peeled for the YouTube community tab, my Instagram, and also my Twitter, where I'll be taking all of the Q&As. So thank you for dropping your questions. As always, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe, hit the like button. Please get involved in the community. I very much appreciate the engagement. We're growing like I said we would. Very much appreciate the support. As always, take care of yourselves. Peace.